So now let's start with the first step that the site can follow, which is complying with the statutory and legal requirements. The first factor to consider when starting a food manufacturing business is the statutory and legal requirements of the country of operation, as well as the country you intend to sell your product to. Many countries have specific and mandatory requirements for food businesses. You must therefore ensure that you investigate your country's relevant laws and regulations for starting a food business. You must ensure that you are familiar with specific requirements related to your industry. If there are laws and regulations you need to comply with before starting with your food operation, ensure that you are fully compliant. The second step is ensuring product legality. In addition to the general statutory and legal requirements for food businesses, food products manufactured also needs to comply with legal and customer requirements. It is important to understand the requirements for every food product manufactured. Some of the examples include the following. What are the permitted food additives and the food additives levels allowed? For an example, is there any specific food additive that is not permitted to reach a certain threshold? Is there any certain preservative that is not allowed to exceed a certain threshold? So one example that I can think of is sulfites, where most regulations do not require that it is put on the label if it does not exceed 10 parts per million. So once it exceeds 10 ppm, then you are supposed to declare it and inform the consumer that there could be an allergen that can cause contamination. You also must determine if the ingredients used are safe and legal. So for an example, in South Africa, Sudan red dye is banned, so you are not allowed to use it in any of the products that you manufacture, those that are meant for human consumption. So you can also look at what are the requirements for food labeling, including the declaration of allergens. In South Africa, we have got Regulation 146 that gives a guideline in terms of what is it that you should be putting on labels and how you should actually inform the consumer about the product that you have manufactured. The food industry has also evolved from just manufacturing simple foods to processing millions of different food products across the food supply chain. It is therefore easy to fall into the trap of producing or manufacturing food that does not conform to regulatory and customer requirements, ultimately putting consumer health at risk. You must ensure that you put consumer safety and satisfaction as one of the top priorities of your food business. The next step will then be to establish good manufacturing practices. Good manufacturing practices are put in place to minimize food contamination and sustain food safety in food handling premises. While BRCGS has its own prescriptive set of GMPs, you can start with basic GMPs during the early stages of implementation. These could include cleaning and sanitation, waste management, pest control, equipment and maintenance, personal hygiene and cleanliness, and if your product is temperature sensitive, you may also include temperature control and measurement. Thereafter, you can build onto your system and then look at what is it that the BRCGS standard specifies with regards to GMPs and build on that and ensure that you comply with the requirements of as specified by the standard. The fourth step is then to implement an effective HACCP system. HACCP is a preventive risk-based approach that ensures that you put proactive control measures of any anticipated food safety risks that could arise due to the nature of the product or the nature of the process. The main purpose of a HACCP system is to ensure that the food that is manufactured or handled is safe. Fortunately, the BRCGS under Requirement 2 has extensive requirements for the HACCP system where it follows exactly the requirements of the Codex Alimentarius guidelines as well as the additional requirements that are required by the BRCGS Issue 9. So you must ensure that you check what are the requirements that are in addition to the Codex Alimentarius in the Issue 9. So it would help you to consult with your standard first and look at what is it that you need to implement in terms of the HACCP system. As we know, HACCP has 12 stages. The first 5 stages are known as the preliminary stages of HACCP, and they include the following stages: determining the HACCP food safety team, describing the product, identifying the intended use of the product, constructing a flow diagram, verifying the process flow diagram. So these are the first 5 stages of HACCP. Then the last 7 stages are known as the 7 principles of HACCP, and they are the following: conducting a hazard analysis, determining the critical control point, establishing validated critical limits for each CCP, establishing a monitoring system for each CCP, establishing a corrective action plan, validating that the HACCP plan, and establishing verification procedures. And then the last step, or the last principle, is HACCP documentation and record keeping. Another very important aspect of the BRCGS implementation step is to ensure that your personnel is trained. All personnel working in the food industry must be adequately trained and competent. There are different types of training interventions to consider which are necessary for personnel in the food industry. So examples include the HACCP team training, HACCP team leader training, general staff training, general food handlers training. You would also have to consult with the regulations of the country of intended sale to determine what is it that they require staff to understand. Are there any regulations that specifically pertain to training staff in food safety? Because that will be your starting point. And as you go on with the implementation, you also would need to ensure that staff members are fully aware of what are the BRCGS requirements depending on the type of work that they are doing. Obviously, the HACCP team leader and the HACCP team must be very clued up as to what are the requirements of the BRCGS so that they are better able to implement it and they have advanced knowledge in terms of the standard, because that's what will be required for them to fully understand the requirements. The next step will then be to comply with BRCGS Issue 9 fundamental requirements. The fundamental requirements are very important because you will not be able to achieve your BRCGS certification without having them fully implemented in your site. The fundamental requirements are as follows: senior management commitment and continual improvement, the food safety plan, internal audits, management of supplies of raw materials and packaging, corrective and preventive actions, traceability, layout, product flow and segregation, housekeeping and hygiene, management of allergens, control of operations, labeling and pack control, training relating to raw material handling, preparation, processing, packing and storage areas. So these are the 12 fundamental requirements of the BRCGS Issue 9. The next step will then be to conduct a gap audit or pre-audit assessment. It is important to conduct a gap audit or pre-audit self-assessment before approaching your certification body. The audit should be based on the current practices of your manufacturing business. It is highly recommended that you consult with an independent food safety expert to perform the gap audit, especially if you are not familiar with GFSI recognized scheme requirements. The gap audit will assist you in identifying non-conformities in your current system that will need to be closed off before the external certification audit. During the gap audit, the internal auditor will review the currently employed management system and related activities such as good manufacturing practices, the food safety or HACCP plan, management systems, documentation, production processes, etc. The internal auditor will indicate all non-conformities during the meeting and in an audit report. Non-conformities must be attended to and closed off before the certification audit. This will ensure successful certification. Careful consideration must be given to the selection of service providers where additional external assistance is needed to implement the necessary changes. You must ensure that you select people who know what they're doing and who have a proven record. So now, as a site, you are satisfied that you have implemented all the requirements of the standard, and now you need to go for certification. You must ensure that the certification body that you choose is deemed competent by international accreditation bodies and approved by BRCGS. Certification bodies use various assessment processes to evaluate if applicants or clients are compatible with the standard they apply for. As an applicant, you will need to complete a provided application form or tailored proposal provided by the certification body to determine the needs of an organization. The certification body will also need business information, the nature of the process, documentation that you have in place, the size of the facility, the number of workers, the number of your HACCP studies, shift patterns, location, product range, etc., in order to understand the organization's structure. They will need to use that information then to give a quotation and also allocate the number of days that would be required for the auditor to be on your site. It is also important to give as much detailed information as possible because that will allow the certification body to choose an auditor who is familiar with the processes. So it is now the audit day. The big day has arrived. What to expect during a certification audit? So the first thing that we must ask ourselves, how does the auditor collect information? The auditor collects information through visual observations as they walk through the facility, documentation perusal, interviews, practical testing, and demonstrations. The auditor will go through the documents, including procedures, policies, records, work instructions, and related information. All records and documentation of the food safety management system must be available and verifiable. The auditor will ask you to confirm information written in documentation and conduct interviews with relevant staff. The auditor will spend a substantial amount of time in the production facility and conduct traceability exercises, including mass balances. In addition, the auditor would want to see product changeover if you do any, as well as label control. Once the auditor has gathered substantial evidence from information provided and all observations in the facility, they will then decide if the organization conforms to the standard requirements or not, and thereafter make recommendations based on the evidence that they've collected. The organization must ensure that all relevant personnel responsible for the food safety management system are available during the audit. So what are the three different audit types for BRCGS? So we have got announced audits that are done based on agreement on the date between the site and the certification body. We also have got unannounced audits where the certification body visits a site without prior notification. For uncertified organizations, unannounced audits can only be done a year after applying for the certification. Then we have got blended announced audits, which are new in BRCGS issue 9, and they were mostly influenced by the experience that we had with COVID-19 pandemic. The blended announced audits incorporate remote assessment into the audit process. The audit is split into two separate parts, a remote audit focusing on the documented system and records, followed by an on-site audit focusing mainly on production, storage, and other on-site areas. Let's have a look at the different audit findings. There are three levels of nonconformity which are critical, major, and minor. Critical finding is where there is a critical failure to comply with food safety or legal issue, or there is a major finding against a fundamental requirement. Then a major finding is where there is a substantial failure to meet the requirements of a statement of intent or any clause of the standard, or a situation identified based on available objective evidence raises significant doubt about the conformity of the product being supplied. Then a minor finding is a clause where it has not been fully met, but based on objective evidence, the conformity of the product is not in doubt. Let's now discuss audit gradings. Audit gradings are influenced by the number and types of non-conformities that the site has attained. For announced audits, the gradings are AA, A, B, C, and D. And unannounced, they are the same except that they've got a plus in such that you'll have the following: AA plus, A+, B+, C+, and D+. Audit rankings range from A to D, with AA being the highest and D being the lowest. So now let's discuss audit types, findings, and grading. The grading of the standard or BRCGS range from AA right through to D. AA is the highest score that one can achieve. So now let's look at how do you get AA, how do you get an A, B, C, and a D. To get a AA, you must ensure that you have got 5 or fewer minor findings without any major or critical findings. If it is unannounced, you'll then get a double A with a plus. To get an A, you must have 6 to 10 minor findings without any major or critical finding. With a B, you must have 11 to 16 minor findings without any major, or 10 or fewer minor findings with one major. Then for a C, there are 3 different ways that a site can achieve a C. Obviously here, once you start achieving a C or a D, that means that the certificate or the audit will no longer be in 12 months time. It means that the audit will be done again in 6 months. So with a C, the audit certificate is valid for only 6 months, and then with a C that has 2 major findings right through to D, that means that a revisit is required within 28 days, and also the audit frequency is 6 months. So now let's go back to how is it that the site can end up achieving a C. So as I've said, there are 3 different ways. There is the first way that a site can achieve a C is when it gets 17 to 24 minor findings. Then the other way that the site can achieve a C is if it gets 11 to 16 minor findings with one major. And then another C is if it gets 2 major findings with 10 or fewer minor findings. Then with a D, which of course, as I've said, C or D is not what you'd want to get. A D is 25 to minor findings without any major, or there will be 17 to 24 minor findings with one major, or there will be 2 major findings with 11 to 16 minor findings. Okay, once a site achieves a critical finding, that will mean that it doesn't get certification. Therefore, you must always, as a site, strive to at least get a B to ensure that the audit frequency is 12 months. Once it is below that, it's C or D, that will mean that the audit frequency is 6 months. And if it is below a D, then of course, you are not going to get certification as a site. How does a site maintain certification? You must ensure that as a site you consistently meet the requirements of the standard, especially the fundamental requirements and everything else that has been specified by the standard. You must ensure that as a site you adhere to annual certification audit dates and ensure that you get audited before the expiry date of your certificate. You must close off findings within the given period. Normally it will be 28 days, but then auditors will request you to submit the corrective action plans within 21 days so that they can have an opportunity to go through the corrective action plans that you have submitted and make recommendations for additional information or for you to submit additional info so that the findings can be effectively closed out. So now let's look at the benefits of BRCGS certification. BRCGS certification is widely accepted and specified by many retailers, manufacturers, ingredient companies, food service organizations, and raw material processors worldwide as part of their supplier approval process. So therefore, the business will receive international recognition as BRCGS is GFSI recognized. It provides a credible, independent assessment of the food safety system and quality system. It also addresses consumer assurance demands and demonstrates industry best practice by encouraging the development of product safety culture. It also demonstrates regulatory compliance, as one of the requirements of BRCGS is to ensure that you comply with the regulatory requirements of the country where you intend to sell your product. It can also reduce the cost of failure because of the many control measures that you have got to put in place. Many certified companies appear publicly on the BRCGS directory, allowing instant recognition, making it easy for potential customers to find and verify certified sites globally. Also, customers do not need to independently audit certified BRCGS sites for compliance, thus saving time and cost. It's clear that there are many benefits that the BRCGS certification can offer to clients or to sites. It is therefore advisable for a site to really attempt to achieve certification. Which industries can apply for BRCGS Issue 9 certification? BRCGS Issue 9 can be used by agents and brokers, consumer products, food manufacturers and beverage industries, storage and distribution for food packaging manufacturers, industries producing raw materials or ingredients used in food production, even feed manufacturing and processing industries.